Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory is a classic fairy tale. And by that I do not mean Disney Cinderella, I mean the Brothers Grimm Cinderella, where the evil stepsisters get their eyes pecked out by a bird. Okay, it's not that intense, but this movie does have a mean streak. It's sarcastic, ironic, and brutally mocks people who fail to live up to a certain moral code. This might give us a clue as to why the movie flopped at the box office in 1971, but gained popularity decades later. We're talking all about it this week in Kaden's Movie Club. Willy Wonka only made $4 million on a $3 million budget, which probably doesn't include marketing or distribution costs. Critics were meh about it, and Roald Dahl, the author of the book the movie is based on, hated it. Mostly because of the changes it made from his book, especially the shift of focus from Charlie to Willy Wonka. For the next several years, it was an obscure movie. In 1977, Paramount decided it wasn't even worth renewing the distribution rights, and they came back to the Quaker Oats Company, who had financed the film so they could sell products with the same name as Wonka's candy in the movie. Since the movie was a failure, they turned around and sold it to Warner Brothers, who would eventually see profitability by selling the TV broadcast rights during the 80s, which contributed to its growing popularity. That only continued when it became available for home video, and by 1996, it had a 25th anniversary re-release in theaters. But we have other bits of proof about the impact Willy Wonka eventually had on pop culture. It's been referenced many times.
I am not Michael. I am Willy Wonka!
Became one of the most common meme formats, and inspired a hugely successful live experience. But maybe the best evidence is the Timothée Chalamet prequel movie, Wonka, which was in the top 10 highest-grossing movies of 2023. So how did it go from obscure 70s movie to household franchise? Last week we looked at Shawshank Redemption, and as we continue throughout the month discussing sleeper hits, there's going to be a common thread. The film airs on TV and/or has a resurgence in home video sales. But similar to Shawshank, I think there's always a bit more to it. Any box office flop could air on TV, but if people changed the channel, they wouldn't keep airing it. So the question becomes, why were audiences more receptive later on than at the time of release? My personal theory goes back to the idea that Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory is almost a satire of the type of movie it's supposed to be, which is a family-friendly musical fantasy. And if you look at the first musical number, it all seems perfectly innocent.
Candyman and posse mixes if with love makes the world taste good.
But only 6 minutes into the movie, we get Charlie's encounter with a man known as the Tinker.
Up the airy mountain, down the rushing glen. We dare not go a-hunting, for fear of little men.
What a weird thing for him to say. He goes on to warn Charlie about the factory, saying nobody ever goes in and nobody ever comes out. It's such an ominous scene compared to the Candyman song we got a few minutes ago. Turns out the lines he said to Charlie are a quote from an old Irish poem called The Fairies, that is literally a fairy tale. It creates a kind of surreal feeling in the scene, and the movie is going to maintain that surreal tone anytime it's dealing directly with Wonka. It always keeps that character and everything surrounding him mysterious and bizarre. But we don't actually get to Wonka's factory until about halfway through the movie. The first half is entirely occupied by the world searching for Wonka's golden tickets. And I feel like people often forget just how funny this section of the movie is.
It's your husband's life or your case of Wonka bars.
How long will it give me to think it over?
It's filled with little vignettes like that, and the director's favorite one actually got cut. In it, a man climbs to the top of a mountain to meet a spiritual guru. Once there, the guru requests a Wonka bar in exchange for wisdom. The man gives the guru the bar, and the guru opens it to see there is no golden ticket, and says, "Life is disappointment." The director's therapist had to explain to him why people didn't think it was funny, saying, for a lot of people, life is disappointment. And I think this little story actually highlights what I'm talking about. Maybe the type of audiences that were seeing Willy Wonka in 1971 weren't quite ready for the tongue-in-cheek tone that the movie has throughout. Look at the first time Veruca Salt is introduced. Her father's making all his factory workers open Wonka bars so she can get a golden ticket.
And listen to this! The first girl that finds a golden ticket gets a £1 bonus in her pay packet! What do you think of that?
To make them go faster, he promises them a £1 bonus. And that's funny, but what's even more sarcastic is that all the factory workers cheer. They're stoked to receive the £1 bonus. Willy Wonka obviously didn't invent sarcastic comedy movies, but I do think it was unexpected in a children's musical. Even more so when it was paired with the dreamlike nature of Wonka's factory, which sometimes is more like a nightmare. From the get-go, the film positions Wonka as a man that can't be trusted, by the characters or by the audience. Gene Wilder, who famously played Willy Wonka, only agreed to do the movie if he could include this scene, specifically so that the audience wouldn't ever know how to interpret his intentions. Is he putting on a show? Is he joking? Or is he crazy? We go from this to immediately having the kids sign a massive contract they can't even read. Guy who just lied about having a physical ailment is now having you sign a sketchy terms of agreement, despite what the character evolved to in our cultural viewpoint.
And there's chocolate, but only one, 'cause makes your eyes pop out, there's chocolate.
The movie doesn't really portray him as the symbol of childlike wonder. There's a cynical humor to it all. From here on out, the movie will consistently ramp up the surrealism. Some scenes feel like they're inspired by experimental film.
Just through the other door, please. Oh, you can't get out backwards. Gotta go forwards to go back. Better press on.
All the while, Wonka isn't even close to a kid-friendly chaperone. In fact, he's the opposite.
Don't just stand there, do something!
Help. Police. Murder.
At every opportunity, the character is depicted with this sarcastic, mocking tone towards the kids and their parents. It borders on satirical, with the humor coming not just from the fact that an adult is unconcerned about the children's well-being, but that a magical adult character in a children's musical film doesn't care about their well-being. And in most scenarios, this would really make Wonka seem like a massive jerk. The reason it works, other than Gene Wilder's great performance, is because the movie has already spent so much time establishing how awful these kids are. They've each got their own flaw that reflects a social critique of the time. Some of them have aged better than others, but Augustus is gluttonous, Violet has no manners, Veruca is spoiled, Mike watches too much TV. And the kids' issues are made explicitly clear through songs sung by the Oompa Loompas.
Given good manners, you will go far.
Similar to the Tinker that Charlie met earlier, Wonka likes to quote classic literature at people. He almost always does this as a response to a complaint from one of the kids or the parents.
Snozzberries. Who ever heard of a snozzberry?
We are the music makers, and we are the dreamers of dreams.
It's another form of that teasing sarcasm. They say something stupid or rude, and he responds with poetry, as if to say, you can't even tell I'm mocking you. And this all culminates in one of the movie's most infamous scenes, the boat ride from hell. As they start down the tunnel, Violet's dad says he wants off, and again, Wonka completely dismisses him.
Hey, Wonka, I want off! Round the world and home again. That's the sailor's way.
And this scene fully commits to the experimental film vibe, with scary shots terrorizing all the passengers. Wonka then recites some more poetry, getting increasingly unhinged.
There's no earthly way of knowing.
He's singing.
And they're certainly not showing any signs that they are slowing!
The thing is, when people talk about that boat scene, they sometimes act like it's random, but the whole movie is sprinkled with stuff like this. It's just the most concentrated moment. And I think the placement of that scene is really interesting, right after Augustus Gloop gets sucked into a tube. It's as if the story is anticipating that the audience might be uncomfortable with what happened to Augustus, but instead of offering some comfort or levity, it just doubles down that the characters are in the hands of a madman. And of course, terrible things keep happening to the children to teach them, and the audience, a lesson. Which is how we come back to that idea of a Grimm brothers fairy tale. Classic fairy tales or fables were usually told to teach a moral lesson. For that lesson to stick, there had to be consequences for bad actions. What happened to Cinderella's stepsisters seems brutal, but in the eyes of the storytellers, it's worth the lesson to the audience about how you treat people with a lower status than you. While the movie directly acknowledges that ultimately the kids aren't to blame here,
Know exactly who's to blame. The mother and the father.
the kids still pay the price. And by the end, the only kid that ends up doing the right thing is Charlie, when he returns the everlasting gobstopper instead of selling it to Slugworth. And Charlie does this in direct contradiction with his guardian, Grandpa Joe, who not only convinces Charlie to steal fizzy lifting drink, but plans to sell the gobstopper to spite Wonka. You can see all kinds of reasons why parents in 1971 might not have vibed with this movie. It was ironic, kinda scary, and upheld a strict moral code that punished children for their parents' flaws. But it upheld the age-old method of children's fairy tales in teaching the lesson in a memorable way. And I think the overall tone, specifically with that cynical humor that would have been a little more edgy for a family audience in 1971, was something that would have become more pervasive in pop culture by the 80s and definitely by the 90s. People often say Willy Wonka is a movie that maintains relevance through nostalgia. I think it's undeniable that this is a nostalgic movie. For instance, its music was consistently used in the marketing for Ready Player One, a movie entirely based around the idea of commercializing nostalgia. But I also find it interesting that nostalgia is usually based around a specific time and place. For instance, Stranger Things is largely based around nostalgia for the 80s and the pop culture of the time. But Wonka exists outside of that because it failed to appeal to the audience of its time. Its bizarre blend of cynical humor and dark fairy tale survived long enough to appeal to future generations. So it only became nostalgic for an audience that was ahead of its time. Which brings us to next week's movie that many people believe was ahead of its time, Blade Runner. Today, Blade Runner is considered a staple of sci-fi cinema, but it took some time to reach that level of cultural recognition. And frankly, I think it's understandable. Even today, I think this is a movie that sometimes people have to warm up to. I'm going to provide just a bit of context that might help for when you watch it later this week. The first thing to note is that Blade Runner is heavily influenced by the noir films of the 40s and 50s. The term film noir is French for black film or dark film. It was coined by a French critic to describe a genre of American films at the time. They were usually crime dramas shot in this moody, dark style. Blade Runner is actually considered to be a movie that pioneered multiple subgenres, one of them being neo-noir. The main character, Deckard, is a kind of detective known as a Blade Runner, whose job is to find and retire replicants. The story takes place in a future Los Angeles where a form of artificial intelligence exists. They're known as replicants. They're kind of like an android, except there's no machine elements to them. They're bioengineered, so they have bodies just like humans, except enhanced with strength and other abilities so they can function as a labor force to do undesirable jobs. The one difference between humans and replicants is that replicants lack empathy. But the company creating the replicants knows they have the ability to gain emotional intelligence over time, so they're given a 4-year lifespan. At the time the story starts, replicants are only allowed on off-world colonies. On Earth, they are illegal, and that's where Deckard comes in. But there's one last thing you need to know. There's generally 2 versions of the movie that are available on streaming platforms: the theatrical cut and the final cut. Most fans agree that the final cut is the better version, and I would recommend watching that version. We'll talk about the differences next week, but in the meantime, here's some questions to keep in mind while you watch. What do you think about Deckard's role as a Blade Runner? Is he a hero or a morally gray character? Why? What do you think about Rachel's character? Does she fit into the femme fatale archetype? How do you think her identity alters the themes of the movie? Why do you think this wasn't received well by audiences at the time? Do you feel it's more or less relevant now? I'd love to hear what you thought about Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, so let's discuss it in the comments like a book club would. And I'll see you back here next week for Blade Runner. And if you want to stay in the know about Movie Club, you know where to go.